I think, Stephen.
Okay, so hello everyone. Yes, my name is Matthew Bell. I work in the Zealand Treasury. I've worked a lot of our long-term fiscal, and I suppose I should make a quick plug-in that we're going to do another of those, which probably likely to come out in March 2020, so it's rather timely for us too, because we're doing a lot of thinking about these issues. Well, hopefully we always are, but of course we gear up a bit more as we move towards our long-term fiscal statements. Okay, so before we start, just very quickly, I always do this as a bit of a sort of cover-off, because I get a bit concerned that people take all that stuff a little bit too seriously. I know you don't, Michael, that's good. But some people take a little bit too seriously. We had Michael Cullen speak at a conference of ours one time, which was great. I mean, it got fantastic. It was after our 213 review, which he was straight away onto all the internet sites and things. If I'd done it, who would care less? Unfortunately, he spent the whole time talking about 40-year forecasts. Wish he hadn't done that. That's not really what they are. They're not forecasts. Okay, so I want to very quickly point out that projection forecasts aren't the same thing. All right, when the Treasury does things like forecasts of the economy, it's going to get those wrong, too, of course it is, and as far as the NSD with its benefits, etc. But at least you've got a group of people doing comprehensive modelling, expert opinion, looking at policies that are in the mix, all that sort of thing, to try, with the knowledge they have at the time, make the best crack of what they think is going to happen, and usually over a fairly limited time period. Projections, on the other hand, they're just potential paths. They use assumptions based on historical averages of growths and levels half the time. They're sort of looking the best thing we've got to estimate the past, the future is the past. They use those kind of things. And probably most importantly of all, I want you to remember this when you see the frightening graphs, is that they depend on the assumptions used very much, and they often build no response in to unwanted outcomes. It's like, well, we're going to hell in a handcuff, or we'll just happily keep on sailing towards hell. So just keep that in mind when you look at some of these things. They are not forecasts. Think of them as warning signals. And here we go. On the other hand, this is one of the more predictable future outcomes. And why is this one of the more predictable future outcomes? Because the majority of these people are alive now. Okay, so we know what's happening in regard to the 65 plus population. You can see some growth. I think you can see from about 2011, pretty much 65 years after the boys came home from World War II, we start to see that picking up of this age group, and it's expected to come. Now that is a ratio of the 65 and above to the 15 to 65. I think there's probably other people likely today to talk about demography, but I'll simply point out there's two major factors behind this. One is reduced fertility. If you get Stats New Zealand to give you a presentation, things about this sort of thing, you'll find that come around about the late 60s, early 70s, there's a very rapid reduction in fertility rates. New Zealand's currently sitting around about 2.1, Liam knows a lot more about this than I do, but New Zealand's currently sitting around about 2.1, which is more or less replacement rate. That's, 2 children and a Cocker Spaniel. Which is a lot better than, Catholic Italy. I think it's down by about 1.3 or something, isn't it? So they're very low, and Japan, well, they're the poster boy for ageing, etc. But we have reduced fertility. There's no real reason. Natalie Jackson, who's the one who spoke on this conference once, out there to say, why would you assume young women nowadays would be like to go back to having 4 kids? Nuclear holocaust is about the only thing to see that happening. So we have reduced fertility. We're more or less at replacement rate. Yes, our net migration's been a bit higher in recent years, but it's unlikely to make an enormous change over the years. And it's also generally New Zealand's net migrations look like a picture of the Swiss Alps. As soon as we have a big peak, there's usually a trough. Now that's not been so true in the last few years, and maybe things have changed a little bit. It's unlikely to be our saviour, though it is good that migrants are usually younger, working age. And of course we've got increased longevity. We've got people living longer for a number of reasons. Now, the Treasury, when we first started doing these long-term fiscal statements back in about 2006, we used to come out with this, it was like people are living longer, healthier lives. Isn't that terrible? All right, so of course it's not terrible. We were sort of doom merchants. We've always been doom merchants, not Roger, but we've always been doom merchants, but that was a bad way to, really did come across like just focusing on all the fiscal pressures. This is a fantastic thing. That you might, people retiring now are likely to live another 20 years, maybe even longer. A lot of kids born today are going to become centenarians. And they're living not only longer lives, but they're healthy lives. Of course, it's a fantastic thing, but it does produce a few challenges. And the sooner we act, both to reap the benefits, and there's benefits in this as well, and also mitigate the problems, the better our society will prepare. Business, government, everyone. to deal with this. Human beings have a tendency to procrastinate, I think, seeing the climate change debate. But we don't want short, sharp, drastic relief, and you've seen from the presentation earlier that didn't always go down too well. Okay, now, this addresses a couple of things. This is a picture, this is some of the things that Michael has talked about in regard. The dotted one at the top is our budget 2000 projection of where NZS to GDP was going to. The next one is about 10 years later, the little dotted one. And that's the most current one we've got of the high E for last year, going to more or less about the same place. Two things to note about this projection. Well, one obvious thing is that NZS to GDP is rising. And I don't even think there'd be too much debate about this. If you understand the reason why, if you believe that the drive with NZS rates pegged to the average wage, it's really a game of demographics here, because that's kind of your non-demographic driver of GDP as well. Okay, so it's simply that your labour force is unlikely to grow at the speed at which the 65 plus population. So it's rising. But note the other thing. So like I said, picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, at least there's two important messages in this. I've just explained that point, that the recipient population, more or less the 65 plus population, growing faster than the labour force, and New Zealand NZS rates linked to average wage growth, it steadily rises. And that story hasn't changed much since Treasury put out its first long-term fiscal statement a lot earlier than that. But do note that that projected rise is reduced. Why is it reduced? It's mainly reduced because of the GDP projections. Okay, when we did this in 2000, we had labour force growth with slightly negative for most of the projection. Nowadays, yes, it falls away with an ageing population of people getting older, moving into lower labour force participation rates, but it's not negative anymore, it's slightly positive. Now, negative 0.2 versus 0.2 might not sound much. If you do it over 40 years, it makes a hell of a difference. That and the fact, and apologies, Linda, they don't work there anymore, that Stats New Zealand keeps raising the base, and it's considerably higher now, what we think was GDP in 2000 than we thought at the time. That's also a factor, but it's largely a labour force thing. But here's the point, and this is the point Michael is kind of making, I think. Sorry if I'm paraphrasing Michael, but if we grow that pie, there's more to go around. There's more to be shared out, and things become more affordable. So yes, it's rising, but there's ways to address these things. Okay, here's a projection of health expenditure. If you look at that line, and I'll talk about this in just a minute, you tend to say, I think it's a bit overdone. It doesn't look like what the history of it's been. It looks like someone's trying to scare the horses here a little bit. Okay, well, I'll explain why that line goes as high as it does and why there's a bit of a background to suggest that this might be the outcome. But there is another line there as well, which is a smaller projection where we just apply 1% on top of GDP growth. Okay, that's health growing in our projections. Why is this maybe not untrue? Well, firstly, the linking of age and population in New Zealand superannuation is fairly clear. That's fairly obvious. The health spending one's more complex. If I've learned anything when I go and speak to the Minister of Health or any health officials, first thing I always say is, yeah, I understand health's not all about ageing, and then spend the rest of the time talking about ageing. But there is an element of it involved in this, okay? Even without ageing, our health expenditure is likely to rise, because the general experience around the world is that as countries get richer, they tend to spend more on healthcare. So this would be happening to some degree anyway. However, ageing does play a role. Here's some figures from 13-14. In that year, the 65 plus age group was 14% of the population, and that's rising. It got, according to the Ministry of Health plus weights, it got 42% of the health services, 3 times its share of population. The under 25, the 34% of the population, got about half of their share. So there is an element of ageing, and that's part of the things pushing that line faster in the projections. And also, increased longevity is likely to lengthen things like average times in rest homes. Now, I know everyone in a rest home is not being paid for by the government, but a lot of people will be. And with some of the poverty statistics and that, it's probably likely to rise. So those are the factors to take into account. Okay, but doesn't that prediction look exaggerated? Well, I hope it is exaggerated. I hope it's wrong. Very likely it is. But if you go back to that graph just quickly, you'll see that this was getting pretty high up until about 2011. About the only thing that stopped things was actually the GFC, the global financial crisis. So if that continued on from that level, just doing the same sort of growth, just applying that growth, that's very simplistic. You'd be at 11.6% of GDP by 2060. Am I the only one who thinks this? Am I the only glowing merchant? Well, no, I'm not. In fact, I'm a lot happier than some of the shiny people in the OECD who thinks that we might go to 12.7% by a relatively recent paper by 2016, which is actually factored in some of the GFC reductions. And they also make comments along the lines of, yes, health spending around the world has slowed a bit with the global financial crisis, but they don't expect this to continue. In other words, they expect the old path of rising up again. And in fact, if you just take the last 2 decades, including that period of reduced growth, then roughly speaking, health has exceeded GDP growth by about 1% a year. GDP growth plus 1%, that's been health growth. Even if you just did that, and that actually disregards the ageing population effect, they just play along with GDP plus 1%, you'd still reach 8.5, which is very similar to what the OECD call their cost containment scenario for health. So these are 2 areas of government spending that are rising. This is why I put up the first slide. Should I believe this? No, I shouldn't. All right? New Zealand debt, if you went back into 90 days, I think got up to about 60% or something, but that might be the gross analysis of net debt after financial assets. Will we get to 120? Will we get to 170? No, of course we won't. All right? Should I take that? Why am I doing this? Why am I looking at this? This is a warning signal. That's fine. It's not what we think is going to happen. It's to say, under current settings, policies, etc., you can't carry on like that. Is that the future out now? If it was, you know, the interest costs would exceed New Zealand NZS, or higher than NZS costs. Right? It's not a prediction, it's a warning signal. Something's going to have to change. I understand borrowing's not the answer to your problems, but there are lots of ways to avoid this. And the longer we delay, potentially the more severe they become. And there are lots of ways. Okay. Well, that's pretty much the same thing. There are many options, and educating the public and politicians about these is one of the major reasons the Treasury does its long-term fiscal projections. And I imagine the Retirement Commission does its retirement income reviews too. Keep the public educated, to keep politicians educated, and keep the issues up there. Now, here's one potential set of options, and I'll stress straight away, this is illustrative only, it's not Treasury advice, I'm making this up. Right? I'm not saying this is, I don't think Chris Fastboy's here yet, but it's not government policy, right? It's not even Treasury policy. But here's, well, the point I'm trying to make is that I'm doing a lot of things here. I'm lifting the long-run tax to GDP by 1%. I'm raising the NZS eligibility age to 67. Doesn't sound like God, I don't know, I'm doing it. I'm restricting health growth to GDP plus 1%. And I'm reducing a few other areas of spending by small amounts. All right? I'm doing a whole lot of things, nothing too drastic. And what does that do? Well, from a model perspective, it does this. Don't worry too much about the big parabola effect. If you're doing this in reality, you'd be making small changes. I've got models that you can hardly be jerking every growth rate all the time, so it keeps the drop and rise. But you could change these sort of policies as you went to keep things more stable. The point being that's about 20% of GDP. That's quite affordable. Well, what does that do? Well, here's history in yellow. Here's the most recent actual finished year in red. There's that gold awful one you saw before. And there's the stabilised one that we've just done. Now have a look. NZS, yes, we've had to peel a little bit of it, but not a lot. Non-NZS welfare, actually haven't even touched it. Health, yes, you pulled it down, but you're only going to the black line. You're not back in where we are at the moment. Education, haven't touched it at all. Other operational expenses made very small changes, and I'll increase tax by 1%. Okay? And in that world, but look at the interest cost difference. Look what that does. There's what's happening in the hell in a handcart. There's the stabilised, because we're not sending it all overseas to borrow. I'm borrowing, because we're not borrowing away at things. Okay. But by the way, tax in those scenarios, 30.1% in 97 and 98. 27.9 most recently, 28.3 our long-term run average. I only increased that 29.3, it's less than it was in 97, 98. The actual expense, or we'll explain that, it's just a market constraint we can get the parameters. We do it more steadily. The big difference is the debt costs that you keep under control by not letting things blow out. Okay, so once again, got to cover off things. These aren't Treasury advice, it's not government policy, that's simply a scenario I put together to show you these things can be done, and they don't have to be done by enormously drastic changes. Also, growing the economy by a more skilled, productive workforce using modern efficient capital is also, in other words, that's Michael's growing the pie argument. And he's right. Obviously, if you grow the pie, you've got more income to spend, you can afford more things. And finally, living longer, healthier lives is a great outcome.
but it does bring challenges and advantages. And the sooner we prepare for these, the better equipped we'll be to reap these benefits and reduce the pressures. And that is that.
Thank you.